So picture this. You're just standing in your kitchen. Or maybe you're sitting at a red light in your car.
Right, just totally mundane situation.
Exactly. And suddenly this craving hits. But I mean, not just a passing thought about a cookie. We're talking a visceral, five-alarm physiological emergency.
Oh yeah, the kind where your visual field literally narrows.
Yes, your heart rate elevates. It feels like, you are going to literally jump out of your own skin if you don't get your hands on some highly palatable, ultra-processed sugar in the next 90 seconds.
And the conventional narrative tells us that this moment right here is just a failure of willpower.
Right. It's a moral weakness. You're just undisciplined. But, okay, let's unpack this. Because if we actually look at the functional MRI data, if we look at the neurovascular coupling inside the skull, at that exact moment, we see something entirely different.
We really do. We see a literal, measurable migration of blood flow.
It's wild. The craving isn't a character flaw. It is an ischemic event in the logical centers of your brain.
I mean, what's fascinating here is that it forces a total abandonment of that old calories in, calories out paradigm.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Which is the mission of today's deep dive. We are unpacking the clinical insights of Paige Alexander, a registered nurse, wellness coach, and co-author of the book Real Food Recovery.
Yeah, and her work meticulously cross-references these sudden metabolic shifts, specifically visceral fat accumulation during menopause, with the neurobiology of trauma.
And it really strips away the illusion that sugar addiction is just a dietary choice. We are looking at a nervous system frantically attempting to self-regulate through chemistry. It's this profound search for safety. It's the familiar hell versus the unfamiliar heaven.
That phrase, the familiar hell, it's so powerful. But to understand that neurological trap, we first have to map the metabolic foundation.
Right. We have to look at the biological wake-up call that forces people to realize they even have a problem. Because for decades, Paige didn't register a system failure at all.
Not at all. She actually describes her early life as being a, quote, spindly kid, naturally thin, but subsisting almost entirely on what she calls a dessert diet.
A dessert diet, which sounds great to a kid, but there's a critical variable here, right? Her childhood hyperactivity?
Yes. She identifies a very specific, undeniable link between her ADHD and her sugar dependency.
Because if we look at the neurochemical baseline of ADHD, we're dealing with a deficiency in tonic dopamine levels, right?
Exactly. The brain is basically operating in a chronic state of understimulation. And when tonic dopamine is low, the system aggressively seeks out phasic dopamine spikes.
Meaning those rapid, intense bursts of neurotransmission.
Right. Just to reach a baseline state of normalcy. And, well, ultra-processed sugar is an exceptionally efficient delivery system for that spike.
So for a child with a hyperactive, understimulated nervous system, sugar isn't a treat. It's practically an exogenous neurotransmitter.
She was essentially self-administering a highly effective, albeit temporary, medication.
And the wild part is she got away with it for decades. Through her 20s and 30s, the compensation just shifted from playground hyperactivity to structured running.
Yeah, she relied on the assumption that she could just out-exercise the caloric load.
Because she wasn't necessarily consuming massive volumes of food, but the macronutrient profile was just heavily skewed towards sugar. And her physiological machinery just burned it off.
And that strategy worked flawlessly, right up until the hormonal architecture of her body collapsed.
The dreaded wall of turning 40.
Yeah. The transition into perimenopause, and eventually menopause, represents a catastrophic structural shift for a metabolism that's been propped up by exercise.
Because as ovarian function declines, estrogen levels plummet.
Right. And that causes a profound alteration in cellular insulin sensitivity. Estrogen normally exerts this protective, sensitizing effect on insulin receptors.
Okay, so when you remove that estrogenic protection, the cells become increasingly resistant to the insulin signal.
Exactly. So the pancreas has to pump out significantly more insulin just to clear the same amount of glucose from the bloodstream.
And insulin is inherently lipogenic. It's a fat-storing hormone.
Precisely. But it's not just that the body is storing more fat. It fundamentally changes where that fat is deposited.
The waistline.
Yep. Estrogen typically directs fat storage to the subcutaneous tissue of the hips and thighs. But as estrogen drops and as the stress of this transition elevates cortisol, the fat storage is redirected to the visceral adipose tissue.
That deep abdominal fat surrounding the organs.
Right. This is why Paige noticed a sudden, aggressive thickening of her waistline. She gained 10 to 15 pounds that completely altered her body composition.
The biological rules of engagement had basically been rewritten. It makes me think of an analogy.
Oh, like what?
Think of it like a video game where you spent 20 years mastering the environment. You know the exact cheat codes, the exact inputs required to maintain your character.
Like running 5 miles a day offsets the dessert diet.
Exactly. But then, overnight, the developers push a massive server update. They change the gravity coefficient. They change the friction mechanics.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Your old inputs don't just yield diminished returns. They are actively working against the new physics engine. You can't outrun the game anymore.
Because the foundational code has been rewritten. But the problem is, the behavioral loop remains totally entrenched.
Yeah, the addict recognizes the physical damage, the waistline, the lethargy, and attempts to, negotiate with the new system rather than dismantle the addiction.
We see this vividly when Paige tries to bargain her way out of the crisis.
The ultimate addict's compromise. Because she had built a highly successful food blog, right? Generating thousands of recipes. So her whole identity was intertwined with food.
Yeah. Her solution to the menopausal weight gain was to try to, as she said, stay in it and stay out of it at the same time.
Which meant swapping out refined sucrose for plant-based sweeteners, like monk fruit. She thought she found the biological loophole.
It's a classic harm reduction fallacy applied to an acute dependency. Substituting the chemical structure of the sweetener doesn't extinguish the behavioral neurocircuitry.
Wait, really? Because you'd think removing the actual sugar would fix the chemical problem.
Well, the brain is still being trained to expect a hyperpalatable reward in response to stress. The monk fruit might mitigate the immediate blood sugar spike, sure.
But it does nothing to resolve the underlying trauma response driving the compulsion.
Exactly. The binges might have become marginally less severe in calories, but the internal hostage situation, the mental obsession, was completely intact.
Which forces us to look at the anatomy of the binge itself. Because if she's utilizing non-caloric sweeteners, and she knows her metabolic health is tanking, the mechanical act of binging defies all logic.
It absolutely defies self-preservation.
She describes these events happening, once or twice a month as deeply traumatic dissociative experiences, floating above her own body, watching her hands literally shovel food into her mouth.
Having absolutely zero executive control to stop it. Eating until she was physically ill.
She called it the state where the monsters come out of the closet.
And to understand how a highly functional, clinically trained nurse can completely lose bodily control, we have to look closely at the phenomenon of functional hyperemia in the brain.
Okay, break that down for us. What is functional hyperemia?
So, the brain operates on a localized, demand-driven vascular system. It directs oxygen-rich blood to the specific neural networks that are actively firing.
Okay, makes sense.
Under normal, regulated conditions, a robust supply of blood is maintained in the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. That's the area responsible for impulse control, consequence evaluation, logical planning.
The braking system, the part that lets you project into the future and say, hey, if I eat this entire cake, my visceral fat will increase, my insulin will spike, and I'll feel awful.
Correct. But when a severe craving is triggered in a down-regulated dopamine system, the brain does not interpret it as a passing desire for a snack.
What does it think is happening?
The amygdala, those deep survival centers, interpret the neurochemical deficit as an acute, life-threatening emergency. The nervous system initiates a fight-or-flight panic cascade.
Oh, wow.
And because functional hyperemia dictates that blood must flow to the most active regions, the cardiovascular system actively shunts blood away from the frontal lobe.
It pulls the blood away.
Yes. It pulls it away and floods the limbic system and the craving center.
Wait. I want to pause here because this is the crux of the entire paradigm shift. Are we talking about a metaphorical loss of logic? Or are you saying there is a literal, quantifiable deprivation of oxygen and glucose to the prefrontal cortex during a craving?
I am saying it is a literal, measurable hemodynamic shift. Functional MRI scans of people experiencing intense cravings show significant deactivation and decreased blood flow in the prefrontal regions.
That is staggering.
And it's coupled with hyperactivation in the center brain. The prefrontal cortex is effectively taken offline.
So the biological hardware required to care about your waistline or your food blog or tomorrow's blood test, it's temporarily starved of the resources it needs to function.
You are left, as Paige says, naked and afraid, operating purely on primitive survival imperatives, like, you're gonna die if you don't get that donut.
That totally reframes the entire concept of shame and addiction. If the blood supply is shunted away from the executive centers, you cannot outthink a craving.
No, you can't. The logic center is closed for business.
You are dealing with a brain that genuinely believes it will die if it does not acquire the substance.
And this strips away the illusion that the addict is just out to get high. We have to discard the notion that a binge is a hedonistic pursuit.
Because the baseline is already so compromised, right?
Exactly. Through years of overstimulation, the brain has engaged in receptor downregulation. It actively reduces the number of available dopamine receptors to protect itself from the dessert diet.
So the individual's baseline existence becomes dull, irritable, painful.
Right. So the binge is not an attempt to get high. It is a desperate, biologically driven attempt to alleviate the agony of withdrawal and just touch a baseline of normalcy.
The craving is a distress signal from a dysregulated nervous system. It is information, not an instruction.
Information, not an instruction, exactly.
Okay, but if the craving is just a distress signal and the prefrontal cortex is essentially offline and blacked out, how do you intervene?
That is the big question.
Because you can't logic your way out of a physiological blackout. How do you manually reroute the blood flow before the hand-to-mouth automation begins?
This is where Page integrates a really specific somatic intervention. And it's an instant physiological hack.
I love a good physiological hack.
When the panic initiates, when that visual field narrows and you start aggressively seeking the sugar, she instructs clients to place both hands firmly on their own face.
Literally just holding their face.
Yes, you make direct, tactile contact with your cheeks and jawline, and you verbally articulate aloud. You're okay, you're safe, I've got you.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little. We're talking about severe neurobiologically entrenched addiction driven by plummeting estrogen, insulin resistance, and a hyperactive amygdala.
I know where you're going with this.
And the intervention is touching your own face. It sounds incredibly esoteric. Like, does this actually interrupt a neurovascular cascade, or is it just a psychological distraction?
Oh, it is definitely not a distraction. It is a direct manipulation of the neuroendocrine system via the C-tactile afferent nerve fibers.
What are fibers?
C-tactile afferents. They are specialized, unmyelinated nerve fibers in the skin, particularly dense on the face, and they specifically respond to slow, gentle touch.
Okay, so it mimics a mother-to-child connection.
Exactly. When you stimulate those fibers, the signal travels to the insular cortex and directly triggers the hypothalamus to release oxytocin.
Oh, the bonding and safety hormone.
Yes. Oxytocin acts as a profound inhibitory neurotransmitter against the amygdala. It suppresses the fear response.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you flood the system with oxytocin, you're injecting a biological safety signal directly into the primitive brain.
The amygdala registers the oxytocin, perceives that the immediate survival threat is gone, and downregulates the panic.
And as the panic subsides, the vascular demand in the midbrain decreases.
And blood flow is rapidly redistributed back to the frontal lobe.
Wow. The brain only knows what you tell it. If you tell it that it is safe, it halts the emergency protocol.
It's a literal manual override.
It's like when a computer system freezes, right? The software is trapped in an infinite loop. You don't keep furiously typing on the keyboard. You reach behind the machine and hold the physical power button for a hard reset.
The face holding is the hard reset. It bypasses the panic software entirely.
That is incredible. And it connects perfectly to the trauma recovery aspect. Because the ultimate goal of a binge is always comfort, isn't it?
Always. And this mechanism bridges perfectly into the psychological framework Page uses, specifically internal family systems, or IFS.
Right, because once the frontal lobe is back online, you have to address the underlying psychological drive.
IFS posits that the psyche is composed of various sub-personalities or parts. In addiction, the craving is viewed as a firefighter part.
A firefighter, I like that.
Yeah, its job is to rapidly extinguish the emotional pain of an exiled, traumatized part of the psyche, usually using the fastest tool available, sugar.
So instead of fighting the brain with shame and brute willpower, which just creates more internal stress, you act as a compassionate parent.
You engage with the firefighter part, you speak compassionately to the craving brain, you say, "Thank you for trying to help me, I know this worked in the past, but I have some new ideas to try."
You are parenting your own nervous system.
It is a radical paradigm shift for anyone listening right now. It's a departure from the traditional militaristic approach to dieting, which relies on restriction, shame, and depleting your cognitive load.
Because willpower is an incredibly finite resource.
If you rely on it to fight your own survival instincts, you will eventually relapse. By utilizing oxytocin induction and IFS, you de-escalate the biological threat without needing willpower at all.
Okay, so the immediate crisis is averted. You held your face, the oxytocin hit, the prefrontal cortex booted back up, and you didn't binge.
A massive tactical victory.
Massive. But
Yeah.
it's only acute crisis management. You can't live your life perpetually holding your face every time your blood sugar drops. How do you rebuild your life so those panic moments stop happening altogether?
Well, you definitely don't do it with a rigid diet plan.
Really, because Paige points out that clients frequently come to her demanding a strict, printed meal plan. They want the external structure.
And she categorically refuses to provide it. She argues that you cannot force square pegs into round holes regardless of whether someone is vegan or carnivore.
But isn't that exactly what a type A addicted personality wants? If their internal compass is broken, why not give them an external map? Just tell them exactly what to eat.
Because rigid protocols inherently mimic the exact conditions of trauma and deprivation that trigger the midbrain's survival response.
It feels like a famine.
Exactly. The nervous system interprets that restriction as a famine state. It elevates cortisol, increases anxiety, and eventually triggers a massive compensatory binge to ensure survival.
So instead of a diet plan, what's the foundational step?
Moving simply to single ingredient foods. No complex macro counting, just biologically recognizable inputs. Beef, apples, broccoli.
It strips away the hyperpalatable neurochemical spikes without triggering the famine response.
And from that baseline, she introduces the core philosophy of her program. Recovery is just a continuous series of edits.
Edits. The terminology is deliberately low stakes.
Right. It implies adjustment, not massive upheaval. You make iterative changes to sleep, stress, spiritual life, mental habits.
But the resistance to even small edits can be staggering, which leads to one of the most powerful psychological concepts from her work, the idea that the brain prefers a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven.
It's a terrifying concept, really.
Why would we actively sabotage our own path toward a regulated, healthy state?
Because the nervous system prioritizes predictability above all other metrics, even happiness or physical comfort. From an evolutionary standpoint, the known variable is always deemed safer.
Even if the known variable is the horrific cycle of a sugar binge, the physical sickness, the shame.
The brain has mapped that territory. It knows it can survive that cycle because it has survived it hundreds of times before. That is the familiar hell.
So when a listener is totally overwhelmed, and they try a massive lifestyle overhaul, throwing out all their processed food, joining a gym, meditating.
The nervous system doesn't perceive that as a positive health intervention. It perceives it as a chaotic, high-probability threat matrix.
The unfamiliar heaven.
Yes. The brain detects the massive changes, sounds the alarm, and actively generates massive cravings and lethargy to force you to retreat to the familiar baseline. It sabotages the recovery to restore predictability.
So if a listener is totally overwhelmed by sugar right now, where do they even make the first edit?
Well, according to Paige's method, you might not even start with food. You start with what's killing you most.
What does that mean?
If your sleep is a total disaster, you edit sleep first. You stabilize the circadian rhythm, which lowers baseline cortisol, which elevates your tonic dopamine.
Because a calm, deeply rested brain simply cannot have a major binge. It's physiologically incapable of generating that level of panic.
Exactly. You build the biological bandwidth to eventually address the nutrition.
Okay, but what happens when the real world hits?
The real world.
Right. You can't stay in a controlled, single-ingredient bubble forever. You are forced into highly triggering environments. Road trips, holidays.
And this is where Paige implements environment over willpower. She calls it her military general phase.
I love this part. For the entire first year of her recovery, she operated with ruthless precision. She food prepped all weekend, she shopped exactly once a week on Fridays, picked her meals 10 days in advance.
But the most extreme tactic was mentally checking her schedule in 15-minute increments.
Which sounds exhausting, but it was a defense against her #1 trigger.
Boredom.
Yes, boredom in an ADHD brain is not just a lack of entertainment. It is a dangerous dip in tonic dopamine.
When the brain registers that void, it immediately scans the environment for a stimulant. By scripting her day in 15-minute increments, she eliminated the neurological voids.
She preemptively filled the space, and she details this strategy perfectly with her husband's birthday dinner.
That's a great example. A perfect storm for a binge, highly palatable foods, high emotional energy.
But she didn't rely on willpower. She drafted a physical game plan. She pre-selected her exact plates. But most importantly, she engineered physical escape routes.
Like pre-scheduling the dishwashing?
Yes, She predetermined that at a specific timestamp, she would physically stand up and start washing dishes to break the visual and olfactory cues of the dessert table.
And planning bathroom breaks just to text her recovery support group, broadcasting her status.
Outsourcing her executive function while she was in a compromised environment. And I have to react to the sheer amount of mental energy this takes in the first year. People usually want a quick fix, a 30-day detox.
But it's an ongoing, high-stakes tactical campaign. And amidst all of that scheduling, she only had one single rule for her entire first year.
Just one. Stay off sugar.
No other rules about portion sizes or calories. If she wanted a third serving of dinner, she ate it.
Because navigating a birthday dinner while suppressing an addiction requires immense neurological resources. If she tried to restrict calories on top of that, she would have collapsed into a binge.
This raises an important question, though, about how we view success and failure in these environments, which brings us to harm reduction.
The sidestep versus the relapse.
Yes.
I have to admit, when I first hear harm reduction, my skepticism flares. Doesn't it just give the addict permission to keep messing up? Like the McDonald's example.
Right, where you're on a road trip, you're stranded, blood sugar is crashing, and the only option is a drive-thru.
Paige advocates for making the best choice available. Maybe a burger without the bun rather than starving and triggering a massive binge later. Or swapping dates for chocolate chip cookies. Isn't a sidestep just a sanitized word for a failure?
To understand why the sidestep is critical, we have to look at the abstinence violation effect.
The AVE.
Yes. When you adopt an absolute black and white standard of perfection, any deviation, even eating a single French fry, is interpreted by the psyche as a catastrophic moral failure.
Which triggers a massive wave of shame.
And shame spikes cortisol. And how does the addicted brain soothe cortisol?
With sugar. The shame triggers the exact biological need for the substance they are trying to avoid.
Precisely. The logic dictates, well, I blew it, my streak is broken, might as well binge for a month. Shifting the vocabulary from a shameful relapse to a contained sidestep radically protects the ego.
It restricts the blast radius. You sidestep is limited to one meal, and at the very next meal, you step back onto the path.
It is the ultimate defense against the familiar hell.
And speaking of defense, we have to talk about connection. Because connection is the opposite of addiction.
It truly is. The Pikes Peak story illustrates this beautifully.
It's so moving. She was hiking a 14,000-foot mountain for an annual tradition. She knew the travel and the physical exhaustion would severely compromise her frontal lobe.
So she asked her Zoom support group who wanted to accompany her, and they all raised their hands.
She physically wrote the words, "sugar-free vacation," on a piece of paper, followed by the names of everyone in her group. And she kept it in her pocket, directly over her heart, for the entire trip.
It's a brilliant somatic anchor. When she felt distress on the mountain, she could physically touch that paper. It tethered her isolated nervous system to the regulated baseline of her community.
But, it begs the question, where does this all lead? Do you have to carry pieces of paper and schedule 15-minute increments for the rest of your life?
Thankfully, no. It leads to a profound identity shift.
By year 2, she went on another vacation, and she didn't need the paper over her heart anymore.
Because the neuroplasticity had finally taken hold, she just self-identified as someone who doesn't eat sugar.
And the mental bandwidth she got back. She joked about finally having the attention span to read big girl books. She wrote her own book.
Gaining the confidence that if you can beat this deeply entrenched neurobiological addiction, you can accomplish literally anything.
Which, tragically, brings us to the emotional climax of her story. Her biological resilience was subjected to the ultimate stress test.
Just 6 weeks before she gave these clinical insights, her husband passed away.
The sudden loss of a spouse. The ultimate trauma. The ultimate trigger to seek numbing comfort in the familiar hell.
But the architecture held.
It held. She revealed that the exact tools of recovery, leaning into the meticulous routines, doing the brain work, regulating the nervous system, literally saved her life during that acute shock of grief.
She didn't seek the dopamine spike. She utilized her regulated nervous system to stay entirely present for the worst moment of her life.
So what does this all mean? It reflects the beauty of her phrase, recovery is practice for life.
It completely redefines the struggle. Removing the biological chaos of ultra-processed foods allows a person to access their true, authentic self.
Without the nervous system bing-bonging all over the place, a person is finally biologically equipped to handle whatever tragedy or triumph life throws at them. Controlling our relationship with food is actually a training ground for surviving grief.
You build the capacity to be fully human.
We have covered such immense biological territory today, from the metabolic tipping point of menopause and insulin resistance to the literal blood flow of a craving.
And the oxytocin hack of holding your own face.
Using internal family systems, the concept of edits, sidestepping, all leading to true trauma resilience.
Just remember, a craving is a biological data point. It is information, not an instruction. It is a wave you can ride out.
The brain only acts upon the data you provide it. So I want to leave you with a lingering question for your own life.
So provocative thought.
Exactly. The next time you find yourself aggressively scanning the room for a sweet treat or zoning out in front of the pantry, pause. Do not rely on willpower. Put your hands on your face. Apply gentle pressure and ask yourself, are you actually hungry for calories right now? Or is your brain just desperately asking you to tell it that it's safe? What unfamiliar heaven are you avoiding right now?